A hybrid SUV is a great way of combining practicality with fuel efficiency. But do you want a hybrid or a mild hybrid? What does that actually mean? And which is better, the Hyundai Tucson or the Volvo XC40?
We're telling you all of that in this review. Before we start, subscribe to the channel to see all of our other new car reviews and go to whatcar.com to get a great deal on your next car.
This is the Hyundai Tucson, and it's a hybrid version of the Hyundai Tucson. So being a hybrid, it gets an electric motor and a very small lithium-ion battery, which all works with its petrol engine. And having the battery and the motor there helps boost the performance and the fuel economy compared to if it was just running on the petrol engine that it's got here. And being a hybrid, it can actually travel for very short periods on pure electric power alone. But this isn't a plug-in hybrid. So a plug-in hybrid has a much bigger battery and can travel for 30 miles, maybe even further on pure electric power alone. And that's something that this hybrid can't do. But with a plug-in hybrid, you need to plug the battery in to charge it up. With this hybrid, it's so small, it can effectively charge itself. So all you have to do to drive this car is just fill it up with fuel, just like you would with any other regular car. This is a Volvo XC40, and this particular XC40 is what Volvo calls a B4. So that is a car with a mild hybrid setup. Now, a mild hybrid doesn't have the ability to travel purely on electric power alone, but what it does have is a system that can harvest energy under braking and deceleration, which can then be redeployed to boost performance and ease the load on the engine, which actually improves fuel economy and lowers CO2 emissions as well. But the first question is, which of these cars looks better? Well, you can tell us that in the comments below. Inside the Tucson, the dashboard's got a relatively logical layout to things, but these touch-sensitive shortcut buttons are just really distracting and fiddly to use on the move. That is a shame, but the touchscreen infotainment system that you get is actually pretty good. So it's a 10.3-inch screen, and it's pretty responsive. It's got nice graphics. You also get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard too. And the main menus on the system itself are pretty simply laid out, so it's easy to get your head around that. Now, in terms of the quality inside the Tucson, it's actually pretty nice. You've got some soft touch materials around. I also like the knurling on these stalks here. But there are some cheaper, scratchier plastics lower down, and also this center console does flex when you lean on it. So it's not completely amazing, but it is pretty good. And certainly compared to Tucsons of old, this is a really big step up, and another pretty impressive interior from Hyundai. Now, one good feature that you get on ultimate trim models is on the driver display here, you get a camera feed of your blind spot when you indicate. And the reason that's particularly useful is because actually the view over your shoulder isn't great because you've got quite a large chunk blocked by the massive rear pillars. But the driving position generally is pretty good in the Tucson. You've got a good view out ahead, and also thanks to this pretty high center console, you get a perfectly placed armrest which matches the one on the door. It is a shame though that the actual door bins down here aren't that big, and there's certainly not the level of luxury that you get in the XC40 with the carpeted door bins. And it's not just the door bins that feel a bit more luxurious, but really this whole interior in the XC40 does just feel like a step up in terms of quality compared to what you get in the Tucson. So most of these materials are nice and soft touch. The buttons operate slickly. There is though some cheaper feeling plastics around this interior and some quite hard edges to some of it down here, especially on the center console. So the Tucson isn't a million miles behind, but the XC40 is just a little bit better. And also, when you're in the XC40, you do sit noticeably higher up than you do in the Tucson. So from behind the wheel, this does feel like a proper SUV, and these seats are really comfortable as well. There's loads of support, particularly loads of side support, and actually the seats in the Tucson do just feel a little bit hard. Now, this 9-inch touchscreen infotainment system that you get in every XC40 isn't the best. It isn't as quick to respond to inputs as the Tucsons. And also some of these icons are really small, and that just means it's quite difficult to hit them when you're on the move. But one of the worst things to point out is that you've got to pay an extra £300 to get Apple CarPlay or Android Auto on any trim of the XC40, which isn't great. That is something that you'd expect to come as free with most modern cars. Now, on both the XC40 and the Tucson, you don't have physical controls to use the air conditioning. In the Tucson, you've got those touch sensitive buttons, and in the XC40, it's controlled entirely through the touchscreen, both of which are rubbish ways to use your climate control compared to cars from 20 years ago where everything just had simple buttons and dials. Now, we've made this point many times before, but particularly with Volvos, people often point out that, oh, but hang on, you've got a voice command system, so it's brilliant. And yes, there is a voice command system and it is reasonably effective, but do you really want to be driving along, hit the button on the steering wheel and then say, turn the air conditioning to 19 degrees? Or would you rather just have one click on a dial and get on with your day? To me, it doesn't seem any easier, the fact that you've now got a voice command system or a touchscreen rather than just having a simple dial that you can adjust. But I'm sure you'll tell me otherwise in the comments below. There is loads of space in the back of the Tucson. So you can see I'm just under 6 foot, the driver's seat's in my driving position, and I've got loads of room to stretch out in there, loads of space under the seat as well. Headroom is also really good. There's loads of clearance above me, absolutely doesn't feel cramped at all. And what's especially impressive back here is the fact that these rear seats can recline for extra comfort. The XC40 actually matches the Tucson for legroom, so you can see good amount available. There's also loads of space for your feet under the seat in front of you, even when it's in its lowest position. And the XC40 does actually offer a little bit more headroom than what you get in the Tucson, unless you go for an XC40 with a sunroof like the one that we've got here, because then it does cut into the available space, and ultimately the Tucson that we've got here is more generous in terms of headroom. The XC40 also isn't as wide as the Tucson, and there's quite a big lump in the floor down here, which you don't get in the Hyundai. What you do get in the XC40 is a handy storage tray either side of the rear seats here though. Those rear seats in the XC40 can only be folded in 2 lumps, whereas in the Hyundai Tucson, each rear seat can be folded individually, which is just a bit more practical. Plus, you get a height adjustable boot floor as standard with this car, and generally it is bigger and better than what you get in the XC40. So in total, you can fit 8 of these carry-on size suitcases into the back of the Tucson here, and in the family SUV class, this is a really, really practical car. But the XC40's boot isn't exactly small. It's also a nice, simple, square shape. And you don't get a height adjustable boot floor, but you can see there's no loading lip at the front. And what you do get is this boot floor, which allows you to just split the boot in half back here. And also it gives you these handy pegs to hang your shopping bags too. You can fit a total of 7 of these carry-on size suitcases into the boot of the XC40. And even though those rear seats don't fold individually, you do still at least get a ski hatch. It's the Tucson with its hybrid setup and the additional electric motor that's more powerful overall. So it'll do 0 to 60 miles per hour in 6.9 seconds, which if you think a few years ago, that was a pretty respectable time for a hot hatch, let alone a family SUV. So it is certainly quicker than the XC40, but with all that poke going through the front wheels, if it's a bit damp or cold, you do actually have to be a bit careful because it's quite easy to spin up the front wheels if you're pulling out of a junction or something. But certainly the Tucson is comfortably quicker than the mild hybrid XC40. But perhaps the bigger advantage this hybrid setup has versus the XC40's mild hybrid setup is the fact that at very low speeds, this can travel in short bursts on electric power alone. So it means if you're driving around town, or if you're in stop-start traffic, or if you're just starting the car up, pulling out the parking space, then it is really quiet in here. And it's all really smooth and relaxing, just as it is in any other hybrid as well. But when you compare just the engines of these cars, then the XC40 is much smoother in its tone. It's just nicer to listen to than the Tucson, which sounds a lot more coarse and grating when you do hear that engine if you're accelerating hard. But the Tucson is in a different league when it comes to acceleration. Something that unites the two cars though are their automatic gearboxes, because they both aren't very good. So if you ask for a sudden burst of acceleration in the Tucson, then there's a good second or two before anything really seems to happen. It's less of an issue in the XC40, but it's still an issue, especially when you're pulling out at junctions. There is just a moment's hesitation before the gearbox realizes that it actually has to do something. So that is a frustration in both cars. There's no competition when it comes to ride. The XC40 is really smooth, it isolates you well from potholes, and the Tucson is just much more fidgety in everything that it does. And you also hear quite a lot of thuds and thwacks from the suspension, which you just don't get in the XC40. The brakes are also a lot smoother in the XC40, so it's got quite a firm pedal feel, but it's really consistent, whereas in the Tucson, it is quite grabby initially.
Now, what about fuel economy? Well, in our testing, which simulated real-world driving in a controlled environment in the same conditions, the hybrid Tucson recorded 36.1 miles per gallon on a mixed driving route, while the mild hybrid XC40 achieved 32.6 miles per gallon. That's not really much of a difference, to be honest, and a bit disappointing that the Tucson with a full hybrid setup isn't a bit further ahead. But then again, it is more powerful. If fuel economy is of primary concern for you, don't forget there's plug-in hybrid versions of both of these cars.
So, a hybrid Tucson might cost a little less to buy than an equivalent mild hybrid XC40, and Hyundai might have a better reliability record overall than Volvo. But the XC40, even though it doesn't offer the full hybrid trickery of this particular Tucson, it's got a higher quality interior, it wasn't that far away in terms of fuel economy, and it also has a more refined engine and a comfier ride. So in this test, the XC40 is the winner. But the Tucson is still a really good family SUV with a very practical interior. And if you want to save more than £2,000 off both of these cars, then you can go to whatcar.com, click on the link up there to go straight to those deals and see all the other savings you can have on every new car on sale. But before you go, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments below which of these two cars you prefer.